allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Kate, may we have the roll call, please?
Patty Crowan,
Here.
Sean Keir,
Here.
Miles Schlesinger,
Here.
and Gary Cunningham and Doug Bryson are absent and excused, and Steve Griffiths.
Here. Do we have any agenda changes or revisions?
No.
All right. Any motion to approve the minutes of our April 17th meeting?
I'll move to approve the minutes.
Is there a second?
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The minutes are approved. I don't think we have any public comments on non-agenda items this evening. No final orders or resolutions. No public hearings and deliberations. We do have some old business. So
Okay.
welcome, Richard, for
Thank you.
the session of the meeting.
Recently, you all asked about what we could do about affordable housing, what actions the Planning Commission could take. So we've pulled some material together to go over with you and discuss as to the extent you want to discuss it. The first thing is relates to affordable housing, and there's more depth here than elsewhere just because things are more defined. And also, recently the state legislature passed a statute requiring all cities over 2,500 people and counties over 10,000 people to allow affordable, or to allow accessory dwelling units anywhere that single-family homes are allowed. And it had a number of provisions that I believe we are in compliance with all of them. There's one that we may not be, but we can talk about that a little bit. But right now, our standards allow one ADU accessory dwelling unit per lot.
Can I ask, is that no matter what the size of the lot?
Getting to that. Okay. The floor area would be 750 square feet, or half the size of the principal dwelling on the lot, whichever is less. The lot size has to be at least 3,500 square feet, and if the lot size is below the minimum lot size for the zone in which it is found, then the accessory dwelling unit has to be attached to or part of the principal dwelling. This is the only one that I'm not sure whether we're totally in compliance with or not, and I'll explain that shortly. We also require them to, their design to be architecturally similar to the principal dwelling and have the same sort of roof lines, materials, and so on. We require owner occupancy of either the accessory dwelling unit or the principal dwelling. We prohibit VRDs, vacation rental dwellings, in both units. And we require one off-street parking space for the accessory dwelling unit. Saw that coming?
Are all the setbacks required for the single-family dwelling the same?
Yes.
So
we have maximum lot coverage, and then we'll have setbacks and height limits, and those will apply across the board. So for a single family, or for a single story house as well as an ADU, the setback is 5 feet, and everywhere except Road's End. And for more than one story, it's 7.5 feet.
So if somebody has already maxed out their maximum lot size, they cannot have an ADU, correct?
Well, they can if it's internal to the house, for example, or above the garage or something like that. But like if they're maxed out and they want to build another structure, no. But they could have like a basement VRD, like daylight basement kind of thing, or refit the attic with dormers to have a unit there, something like that, that would be all right. Now, this is an area where we may be able to make some changes. The state law says we have to allow at least one accessory dwelling unit per lot. The implication, of course, is that there can be more than one if we want to. And that's something for discussion,
lot-
debate, whatever.
If the lot permits that.
Right, again, based on, you still have lot coverage and so on. There, as you add more dwelling units, I know people will be concerned about parking, congestion, and traffic and that kind of thing. So,
Do we allow more than one per lot in
we
our,
allow one right now,
and only one?
only one. Yeah.
But there's nothing stopping a citizen from asking about two?
Well, it's not allowed. It would take an ordinance amendment.
Oh, okay.
So if somebody had a large lot, then we might make it feasible for them to have two ADUs, or perhaps one ADU over their garage and then a separate ADU
Right.
on the lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If that's the route you and the council want to go.
Sense to me.
Floor area, again, what our standard is now is 750 square feet or half the size of the principal dwelling, whichever is less. One thing that does is if you have a small house, you can end up with a really small accessory dwelling unit. The Department of Land Conservation and Development recommends a minimum of 800 square feet, or maximum of 800 square feet, period. No relation to the size of the principal dwelling at all.
So for example, my house is, I probably shouldn't use a specific example, but I will. It's probably about 750 square feet minus the garage. So that means if I had an ADU, it would have to be half the size of that?
Under our current rules, yes, it has to be 375 square feet or smaller. If yours is 750.
But if he wanted to remodel the garage or create an 800 square foot or 750 square foot unit, that would be allowed even though,
No, not under our current ordinance. It's, again, it's either 750 square feet, less than 750 square feet, or less than half the size of the principal dwelling, whichever is less. So, again, a small house gets a small accessory dwelling unit.
Even though the small house may sit on a big lot.
Right.
Even though, yeah.
Right. This is the one I'm not sure whether we're in compliance with state law or not on. The state law, the new statute says that we have to allow them in all areas where single-family dwellings are allowed. It's a little bit vaguely worded because we allow them everywhere except if you have a really substandard lot, 3,500 square feet or smaller. So whether what the state means you have to allow them everywhere no matter what, or whether this is one of the reasonable restrictions we could put on them, I'm uncertain on at this point.
So what is the minimum lot size now in a residential area?
In almost, well, in the R15 zone is 5,000 square feet. In the R175, it's 7,500 square feet. In Nelscott, it's 3,750. We do have areas where there are some very small lots, and we do allow people to build houses on them if the lots were lawfully established. So the question is whether you want to allow an accessory dwelling unit in even very, very small lots. What we require is if your lot is smaller than the standard for the zone that you're in, the accessory dwelling unit has to be attached to the main dwelling unit. And we're just saying if it's 3,500 square feet or smaller, you can't have one at all. And that we can change that if that's the way you want to go.
So When it's called an accessory dwelling unit because it's accessory to another unit on the property,
Right.
I assume. So in Steve's example, if his house is 750 square feet, could he flip that if his lot was large enough and say that that the existing house is now the accessory dwelling unit, and he could build a larger place or an equal?
Yeah, he could build a
That
3,000
size?
square foot house, and if his existing house is 750 square feet or smaller, then,
It just changes the designation somehow?
yeah, it's just, we allow 2 dwelling units, a principal and an accessory, and one of them is bigger than the other. It's just, so,
Okay.
we have the requirement that architecturally, the accessory dwelling unit has to be similar to the principal dwelling unit. And we don't require it for any other accessory structure on a lot, so garage doesn't have to be similar. Anything like a tool house doesn't have to be similar. One of the criticisms of that requirement is that if you have an ugly house, we're going to require you to build an ugly accessory dwelling unit. Yeah, but I mean, it's, well, or, just whatever, but, there's, you can have there's nothing wrong with a different architectural style necessarily, or certainly a better architectural style.
Well, is similarity defined? Is that like
Yeah, it's
siding or?
Similar roof line, color, siding, yeah.
So that would prohibit me from getting a tiny house and putting it on my lot, or whatever, if I had a bigger house,
Right.
because it's not going to be the same design as my house.
It's not going to be similar, yeah.
It's not going to be similar, yeah, so we might
Exactly.
want to eliminate that one, yeah.
I get the similarity thing. I mean, you've got, my dad and I built a mailbox to an old Victorian that made it look just like the house, and it sat on the street and it had been turned into like 6 apartments. But if we had done it something else, it would have looked like a big hunk of junk. And I feel like if you've got this little tiny quaint lot here on the coast, and you're gonna have this cute little beach cottage, and you wanna put a smaller beach cottage next to it, you kinda want them to look similar. And I would hope if my house was the ugly one, that I would redo that one first.
Yeah, well, it's, to eliminate that sort of flies in the face of any sort of design standards.
Yeah.
Well,
What,
not necessarily. I mean, you could have design standards saying this is what we want in terms of design of ADUs. Again, there are dwellings in Lincoln City that are not that attractive, and whether we want to perpetuate that with new construction, something to consider.
do we have design standards for each of the neighborhoods?
No, only for commercial.
We do have some design standards for housing, but they're pretty minimal. And they apply to all single-family. We have some, and I can't even think what they are, but you have to have.
There's a list of 5 or 6 things, and you have to have, what, 2 or 3 of them? 2 of them is like, gable roof or covered porch or something. Eaves, yeah. I mean, nothing very demanding.
But when we're just starting a design guidelines project, and we will be reviewing all our design standards for all our uses. So, this may be something that we could take a look at and get some advice.
We require owner occupancy, and that's something that state recommends against the similarity requirement. They recommend against the owner occupancy requirement. By limiting that, then it would mean that the person could rent out both the principal dwelling and the accessory dwelling unit. Vacation rental, we don't allow them in an accessory dwelling unit or the principal dwelling if there is an accessory dwelling unit on the lot. That was discussed at the time we were initially approved accessory dwelling units, and there was, the council was very much against allowing accessory dwelling units, or allowing vacation rentals in that circumstance. One could argue that probably, at least in some cases, having a vacation rental in one or the other makes it more likely it'll be well-maintained and well-managed, because maybe the owner's on the same lot with it or something like that. So.
I don't know, I think since that one's been discussed in a public forum before, we should probably leave that the way it is.
Well, they've all been discussed at least at some level, but, time has passed, and one thing we've seen is we haven't seen very many accessory dwelling units built, and one of the reasons may be the kind of limitations that we put on accessory dwelling units. I'm not saying this one particular one's a good idea. I'm just saying there's nothing wrong with going back and taking another look at what we allow and see whether some changes should be made.
Personally, I don't really have the stomach to open vacation rental dwellings again for a while. It's, as they say, too soon for me.
I feel your pain.
And I'm not advocating necessarily for that either, but in November, I gave a presentation about going to an ADU conference in Portland, and I remember hearing from 2 or 3 of the owners specifically that they plan to rent it as short-term rental for a couple of years in order to recoup some of the cost of building it.
Right.
And then they intended to turn it into a long-term rental. And so that may be an argument for if we want to try to encourage more construction of them, that is one way that they can do it. And I assume that it would still be limited to the R15 district and still would be under the cap. Wouldn't that be true, Richard?
Yes.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, but if we're talking about ADUs as a way to address affordable housing, this flies in the face of that. I'm sorry, but it's what we don't need is more short-term rentals. What we do need is long-term affordable housing. And at least my perspective is that the ADUs could afford some help in that regard. I don't think.
Now, what would you think of this? What if there was a large VRD and they wanted to make part of it into another unit, an ADU? Say there was a VRD that was intended to sleep 24, and after our current, our newest, latest revisions to our VRD ordinances, they're only allowed 15. So what if they wanted to make part of that house another unit for a long-term rental?
Well, don't they have to be owner-occupied to have the ADU?
Well,
Yeah.
that's also on the list of things to talk about. That's the one right before this was, do we want to make sure that they're owner-occupied, one of them at least is owner-occupied, or don't we?
Here's
Don't we care about that?
The problem I see with the, short-term rental aspect of this is that it has an immediate negative impact on long-term rental housing base. And there is after they get their feet wet with that, there is literally no incentive left for them to go back to a long-term rental situation, which I'm sure plenty of renters want to take care of their rental place. I do. I have. This is a very tough one. There's just nowhere for anybody to be for a long period of time, and the more you kind of let it trickle out to short term, everybody's going to want to do short term. And why? Why would I could rent this place out for a third of the time and make more than I could in a year of rent with somebody.
I don't know if it would be manageable to allow vacation rentals for a maximum of a couple years or something like that.
If there was a a hard cap that they could never do anything else again after that? It had to be long-term, you know, they just couldn't, maybe, but it's still a slippery slope. Because now we're just pushing the timeline of available housing back.
I agree. I think our challenge is really to get the word out on the advantages of an ADU for permanent residents here in Lincoln City, especially those of us who are retired and may like to have an ADU on our property that we could rent out to a caregiver or to somebody else who really needs to be there, you know, who's reliable and is a teacher, needs long-term renting. But I really think we should focus on getting that market, and I'm not quite sure we have reaching that market or getting the word out on, and I'm not quite sure we've done that. But I would not want to consider the vacation rental issue, yeah, for ADUs.
I don't see the need for owner occupancy, because there's some people that could develop their land and rent their house out that they live in, and the smaller ADU could be rented also. And I don't know why that requirement is there in the city.
How are you differentiating between an ADU and just a two-family lot development, you know, multifamily development?
The principal thing is the size of the accessory dwelling unit. It could end up looking a lot like a duplex, there's no question of that. But the ADU is generally going to be very much substantially smaller than the principal dwelling.
This is going to be smaller than an apartment?
Could be.
Yeah, could be. There's some big apartments out there.
750 square feet, though, is a nice-sized one-bedroom apartment, I think.
Mm-hmm, yes. You know, I think that is a good question, Patty. It's something that we would have to look at, because right now we require 8,000 square feet for a duplex, and we could end up, if we allowed, say, a 4,000 square foot lot to have both a principal building and an attached, ADU, then basically it would be getting,
Be like a duplex.
it would be just like a duplex, except it would be on half the lot size.
Twins, they're just,
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
okay.
And especially if we got rid of the owner occupancy requirement.
I think that owner occupancy is like one of the last things holding the line. Because if you take the owner out of the place altogether, then who's going to stop them from renting it out however they want to? What if they just put it on Airbnb and don't apply for a city license?
Oh, we'll catch them.
Will you?
We check that. We check that, we check Craigslist, we check a lot of things.
That's, you could say that about any house, but yeah.
Yeah,
And we do check and we do
And
find them.
The less checks that are there, I kind of feel like, let's just go running over here. I would.
I think the owner occupancy does help the neighborhood in the sense that the owner is present and
Yeah.
is managing their units there, and
Yeah.
that's would make the ADUs more amenable to the rest of the neighbors in the community, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the arguments about the VRDs, was that the owners were absentee. And so having the owner occupied and there makes a lot of sense. And just to be clear, I could rent out my house without ever going on Airbnb or Craigslist or any of the things that you could check. So it's, I know you try, but it's never going to be foolproof. And with the owner occupancy requirement, that just keeps it a little more,
Same.
Your
Constrained.
neighbors will rat you out.
well, all of my neighbors are part-timers, so.
And the other thing is, again, we have a requirement of one parking space per accessory dwelling unit, and again, the state doesn't require, but suggests maybe not requiring a parking space an off-street parking space for accessory dwelling units. I'm running all this stuff by, this is, these are ideas, and really, my sense was you all wanted to initiate something, so I'm putting things on the table now, and you can say how you want to proceed from that. I'm going to go beyond accessory dwelling units now to talk about some other things. So, first is to allow a density bonus for developments that include affordable housing. Right now, for a planned unit development, if it includes 5% affordable housing, it gets a 10% density bonus. So just to make things easy, if it's a 100-unit project, 5 of which are set aside as affordable workforce housing, then they could actually build 110 units.
Can I get a definition on affordable workforce housing? How is that graded?
The council has not decided that. Things range. What we've been doing on a working basis is, I think it's 80 to 120% of median family income. If you can afford the rent or mortgage at that income level, and by affording it, it's not being more than 30% of your income going to your housing costs, then it's considered affordable.
Not more than 40%, you said?
I think 30%.
30%, all right.
It varies. Some places, depending on what context you're looking at, it could be 50%, could be 35%. Just depends on the specific situation. City staff has been working with the idea of 30% being the working definition that we use. But again, there's nothing formal has been established.
Thank you.
So what sometimes is suggested as far as density bonus, like I said, we allow this a 10% bonus for 5% affordable housing in the planned unit development. The suggestion is if there's 20% affordable housing, then there is a very substantial bonus. Like in this illustration that's up there, you get 20% affordable housing, and you get it's hard to see from the colors on there, but the bottom 6 units there are a different color. And so that's a 30% density bonus for 20% affordable housing. And that's a suggested way of approaching that.
Is that the only offset currently available, is a density bonus? Is there anything like discounted fees or development costs or anything?
Not at this point. Well, I should say that for accessory dwelling units, we don't assess system development charges, which is a huge benefit.
And that's the difference between that and a duplex.
Yeah.
Say again.
We don't assess system development charges for an accessory dwelling unit.
But on duplex,
There'd be 2 system development charges you'd pay. Now, that can be seen as a rational approach, because your standard duplex is roughly equal size houses. Accessory dwelling unit is a much smaller house, which translates into much more affordable. So we're trying to encourage that, so it's a subsidy or whatever to promote affordable housing. On inclusionary zoning, it's similar to the bonus, except instead of being voluntary, it's required. State law allows cities now to have an inclusionary zoning program. If you've got a development or a project of 20 units or more, you can require up to 20% affordable housing, and the offset for that is some tax abatement and other financial incentives. So that's something that we can consider.
what do you, if you don't have a firm price and though, what income level, the income that's generated by Lincoln County workers in the hospitality industry, do they make even enough to have any benefit from the tax abatements? Can they afford a house at those things?
You know, it depends on the individual, but someone working basically just at minimum wage, forget what it is right now, it's $10, might be, we'll say it's 11, but that's only, what, $22,000, $23,000 a year, which is not much, and so 30% of that is not much, so if there's one minimum wage job, it's going to be hard to afford a place to live no matter what.
And that's part of the problem that Lincoln City has now. That's why our housing stock really is not too good, I don't think.
That's why there's such a huge demand for affordable housing, why people live outside the city where land costs are less, and why people double up, triple up, and that kind of thing, or have more than one job, more than one wage earner in the household, those kinds of things.
There was a write-up recently in the paper about new housing development in Yachats, I think, and to qualify to rent one of the units there, you earn less than 60% of the area median income. So, for example, a single person who makes $22,000 a year or less would be qualified to rent a studio apartment there. But it's very tightly controlled, so you have to show proof of income, and you're given a preference if you live in the zip code area, or you have a child who's going to school in the zip code area. Yeah. But
another possibility we could look at is revising our manufactured home standards. Right now, we have in our zoning code a requirement that manufactured homes be at least a double wide and at least 1,000 square feet. We don't require that of stick-built homes, anything like no minimum size on stick-built home, no minimum width, that kind of thing. So the pictures here, the picture on the left actually is two park model RVs, but they're basically representative of a single wide manufactured home, less than 1,000 square feet. The two on the right, or the one on the right is a small stick-built home. And the one on the right is allowed, the ones on the left are not in the single-family zone. And, we have seen a number of very small houses be built in Lincoln City, between 400 and 700, 800 square feet.
if we're, encouraging ADUs and tiny homes, it might make sense to change that ordinance to go to the 1,000 square foot,
Yeah.
assuming they meet all the other requirements.
Yeah, manufactured homes aren't what they used to be in terms of style and design and so on. So I think that the standard that we had made sense at the time, but it at least warrants another look.
Are the manufactured houses expected to be put on foundations when they are mounted, or can they be left with the trailer, basically?
No, they have to be off their wheels, have footings or foundation, and if it's footings, then they have to have skirted around the base.
Skirting or cement, something of a cement nature.
Yeah, but they can't be on wheels anymore. Wheels have to be removed.
So the permanent structure is non-movable.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. The idea is to make them real property,
Right.
as opposed to personal property. Another
might, it might make sense to look at, I agree what you said, they're not what they used to be. And I don't know when that flipped, what year, they started becoming more, I don't know, home-like and less trailer-like. But, maybe looking at the standards and the years would make sense. I mean,
I think my trailer that I bought in 1990 was considered personal property until I built the stick-built house, but I can't really remember, but I think
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I can't remember whether I was, but I think the taxes were substantially less because it was on wheels and backed up and the wheels were taken off, but the axle was still underneath the place.
Yeah, you get a license. I mean, in California, you get a license just like you would a vehicle for a mobile home.
Yeah, and another thing to look at is a minimum density standard. Right now we have maximum density standards. Minimum would, for instance, in the R15 zone where we have the minimum lot size is 5,000 square feet, we want to make sure that the land is well used and that people don't go into the R15 zone and set up 20,000 square foot lots. So use up the land for fewer houses. So say that they have to be, when typically it's like not more than, lots can't be more than 150% of the minimum lot size for that zone.
You lost me on that.
Okay.
Run that by me again.
Okay. We require a minimum lot size, say 5,000 square feet for the R15 zone, which translates to about 9 units per acre. If someone wanted to go in and put one house on that acre or 4 houses on that acre, right now they could, and that you use up that acre where there could have been 9 houses. The idea of a minimum density is saying you have to use up your land, use it well, not have large lots, not have it gobble up all the land. So would say if in the R15 zone, for example, would say the 5,000 square foot minimum lot size, but there also might be a maximum lot size of 150% of the minimum or 7,500 square feet. So that you can't gobble up the land, so we have to keep spreading out, extending services and so on. If you extend services out, that costs money, and so it.
No, I understand that part. One thing that I've just impressionistically observed in the last few years here in Lincoln City is the tendency to build a house and put the maximum footprint you can or you are allowed on that lot. And as a result of that, the lot is totally cleared. Often, even the topsoil is removed. And in the long run, I think that's going to change the visual impact of our community. All the trees, you're not going to have the hemlocks, the spruces, or the coastal pines anymore. You're just going to have a lot of houses built out to the maximum size on their lot. So I can see the need for that, but on the other hand, I think we need to encourage maintaining the natural look of the environment here, and I'm not quite sure how we could do that.
Yeah, now, in the single-family zone, we do have a 35% maximum lot coverage. One of the things is generally that comes out of the middle, so it looks like a house may be taking up 50% of the lot or something, but it really isn't. They build out 35% as as much up to that maximum percent, and then they've got the driveway, patio or something which takes up a little more. But it's can be surprising, like with a 5,000 square foot lot, how much is left with 35%. I mean, it's what's that? 1,750 square feet is the maximum footprint.
Perhaps we could offer incentives on maintaining natural landscaping. You get a reduction in SDU charges or something like that.
Or you get
So we
more
maintain the natural look of
Or you get what?
the area.
Or
Yeah.
you get a higher minimum density standard. You know, that may be the key, is figuring out what a reasonable maximum or minimum density would be. You know, when we were going to we're considering buying the villages, that was one of the fears of city administration, was that somebody could come along who has $2.5 million and buy the whole thing and put their house on the top of the knoll and, you know, call it good. And that would have been devastating in terms of our long-term planning and, you know, housing stock. So, anyway, that's, you know, it could be, you know, a very small amount as a minimum density, or it could be something different.
You know, when we start talking about density, I know we've talked previously just generally about looking at an overlay zoning for high-risk areas like tsunami inundation areas. And so I just think we need to be mindful of not inadvertently increasing the density in areas that are going to put more of the population at risk in the event of some sort of catastrophic natural disaster. So I just want to put that out there, that we remember that, and we don't do something we might regret, or the people living there
We
might
don't want
regret.
unintended consequences. Another thing to think about is whether to prohibit detached single-family dwelling units in a multifamily area. If you think of in Ocean Lake on the east side of the highway, all those single-family homes up there, that's all zoned RM. And we have a lot of, well, not a lot, we have substantial areas of the city that are zoned RM that don't have anything on them yet. And in the interest of promoting more dwelling units, essentially equaling more affordable dwelling units, we may want to consider whether we should allow single-family dwelling units on that undeveloped RM land in the future.
Would the RM land be good candidates for the cottage clusters?
Sure, yeah.
I think I like that idea, actually. I think if we, you know, past planning commission that worked on a comprehensive plan, designated areas of the city for R1 or R5 or R7, and also RM. And, you know, it would be interesting to find out what percentage of RM land has been developed as single-family units. I know there's an area in my neighborhood where that's happened. But, you know, if we want to encourage affordable housing, I think we really need to encourage developers to use their property if it's zoned MF, multifamily, to develop multifamily housing there, yeah.
I think Sean has a good point, though. We'll have to be careful not to exclude cottages.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, if we're thinking about
But that you said
mobile
that
homes
is
and
part
the
of the
smaller houses, I mean, if we can allow those things, if they can put one of those little tiny houses that comes in on wheels and put it up on a foundation in a cluster on one of these.
Yeah.
But that would be defined as multifamily, correct?
Well, it would be a
Well,
single-family
it's not,
house.
But you could, if that's what you want to have, you could
like that
continue to allow them in the RM zone, whether they're allowed now, but you could, you know, continue to allow them.
So is what you're
Explicitly.
saying is we could decide to eliminate further development of a single home on a lot in the multifamily zoned area, but we could allow multiple single homes on a lot.
Yeah, no, again, we have a special section in the code that defines what a cottage cluster is. And it's a certain number of houses of a certain size in a certain configuration, maybe around a central green and that kind of thing, essentially a double density level than what we ordinarily allow for single family. So we've got that they're relatively tightly defined. So it's not saying we're not going to allow a single family home, but if you want to put in 12 of them, that's okay, because that's not where this goes, because we're talking about much smaller and much different design standards,
Yeah.
site development standards for a cottage cluster.
What are the design standards for a cottage cluster then?
I think there's size limits. I don't have this right in front of me. There are size limits. And I think the biggest you can have is 1,250 square feet, including a garage. But I think most of them in a cluster have to be substantially smaller than that. And
They all have to have porches that face the green.
yeah, there has to be a central green, and
They can be double the density of the underlying zone.
yeah.
Is it so tightly defined that nobody wants to build them? I mean,
Well, we haven't seen any yet. We did have somebody who was interested, but
Backed out for a different reason.
for a different reason, and we'll talk about that reason later, I guess.
Could tiny homes be converted into a cottage cluster if they're designed on the lot sufficiently?
Yeah,
That would work? Yeah.
good.
Could
Yeah.
work, okay.
And you know, another thing that approach for that is rather than exclude single-family, right now, if you want to build a single-family in a multifamily zone, you have to have a minimum of 5,000 square feet. So maybe of lot area. So maybe you reduce that to 2,250, which is what we require of a unit in a multifamily building in that in the zone.
Yeah,
You know, so that might be another way you could still have your small house.
As long as you have a minimum density requirement. So you could have them at 2,500 square feet, but with minimum lot size of 2,500 square feet, doesn't mean that you couldn't build it on 5,000 or 10,000 square feet.
Mhm.
I would have to protect against that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we can work that out.
We'll talk.
Yeah, we'll talk
We'll
about
talk.
that later.
We have a requirement for multifamily dwelling units that each has to have a minimum of 2 parking spaces, except for units that are designated as senior dwelling units, well, then it's 1 per bedroom, with a minimum of 1. And so like a 1 or 2 bedroom, a 1 bedroom or a studio would only require 1 parking space, a 2 bedroom would require 2, 3 bedroom would require 3. We have had a couple of apartment complexes built recently that included some senior units so that they could have a lower parking requirement, essentially. This is something we've been talking about for a while, and I've been saying we want to take a look at how parking is used now in the existing apartments, just to see whether it's warranted, whether there's too much parking and so on. Haven't done it yet, and it just takes staff time to get out there and start counting cars, parked cars. So,
I think there's probably movement for change on that one, yeah. A 3-bedroom apartment, I'm sure can get by with 2 parking spaces. They probably don't need 3, but.
well, we don't require 3.
Oh, I thought that's what you said.
For a 3-bedroom senior housing unit, we require 3, but if it's not designated as senior, you could have just 2 parking spaces. One thing can be done is across the board is tie the number of parking spaces to the number of bedrooms, rather than what we do now. It's just say, no matter how many bedrooms or whether there's any bedroom at all, you have to have 2 parking spaces. It could be, if it's a studio, 1 parking space, or 1 bedroom, it's 1 parking space.
Well, you told me something, I think maybe it was you, if we build for cars, we're going to get more cars.
Right.
If we build for pedestrians, we'll get more pedestrians. What if we went down and kept the senior parking? I think that's totally legit. You need one for the person until they can't drive anymore, and one for a caretaker possibly. Or because they have a handicap of some sort and they need a bigger vehicle. But what if we just went down to one per apartment and you had a little overflow spot for guests who come over so they have somewhere to park?
No, in my apartment house that I'm there, some of the people don't even have cars there, or they have one car and it's
They're becoming unaffordable.
two-bedroom apartment house.
Yes, especially in places where there's good transit. There's lower number of cars per dwelling unit. Our transit system here isn't that great, and so we tend to be more auto-dependent. But there are people that don't have cars; they walk or share or whatever. We just need, it's just something to think about, something we can take a look at and do some
It'd
more
be good to have
analysis.
some data on it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, the apartment managers, as they rent them out, I'm sure they keep track of how many cars each of their residents has. You know, where it gets tricky is when the housing is so unaffordable that you have 3 unrelated adults living in a 3-bedroom or 2-bedroom apartment, and all 3 of them have a car.
Exactly.
So I think if we can collect some data on that so we know what we're talking about, and then we can see about maybe cutting back if we can.
I think you're right. We need the data first.
And I would guess that the apartments, you can count all the bedrooms that are being built and get so many are get averages so that you can say, okay, this apartment house has 300 bedrooms, but only a certain percentage are going to have 2 cars or 3 cars and 1 car, so you can get a flow, and maybe that way you could cut down the requirement for 2 people or 2 parking spaces per unit, and say you've got 1.7 per vehicle cars needed, parking spaces needed.
Another possibility to consider regarding multifamily residences is we require 250 square feet of recreation area per unit. And question is whether we need that, or whether we need that in, whether it's a high density or lower density apartment complex, or whether it's close to the beach or close to a park or whatever. That's one thing to think about. Another is we do have high density and low density allowance for multifamily, depending on how close it is to a commercial zone. And question is whether we should continue that differentiation, or sometimes we have a split where part of the lot is close enough to count for high density, whether we make that area bigger, you know, where we say it's within, what, 200 feet? And so maybe make it 300 feet or something, so to allow more high density. Also, something relatively small, but maybe not so small, is the way we calculate the number of dwelling units allowed is it's 8,000 square feet for the first 2 units, which is the same as we require for a duplex. And then if it's low density, 2,250 square feet for each additional unit, or if it's high density, 1,200 square feet for each additional unit. That 8,000 takes out 3 or 4 or 5 units that would be allowed if we just did it across the board at 2,250 or 1,200 square feet per unit.
But is that square footage that's overage used for like open space?
Well, we have, in addition, a requirement for a certain amount of landscaping, and again, a certain amount of so-called recreation area that's over and above the square footage that's needed for the dwelling unit.
Right, but doesn't that then usually cover part of that additional square footage, that
In a sense,
8,000
in a
square
sense.
feet?
I think, in my experience in reviewing the multifamily projects that we've had, they try to hit the number, whatever, if they get 29 units, they want 29 units. And then they squeeze in the parking and the recreation space and the yard setbacks and that's, so, yeah, it is questionable whether they could actually use any more density unless we maybe increase the height, the allowed height of the building.
Yeah.
Say in the high-density area, that may be the way to be able to add some density.
Yeah.
Because right now, in multifamily, we limit it to 35 feet. And so and in the high density, they have to be within 150 feet of commercial. So if we just extended that 45 height limit, that's a possibility.
The idea of reducing the amount of open space that's available in a multifamily unit troubles me a little bit, because I think of these units as having lots of kids that live in them. I mean, we're not talking about an area that's full of just professionals without kids, and the kids don't have any place to play. And so we take away those areas, or we say, well, you can count your deck space as the outdoor open space. Now all of a sudden you've got kids playing in the parking lot, or not having any place to be. And it troubles me to think that we would look at that as something that was expendable. And I think, back to Steve's point earlier, in some instances that's the only thing that's green around, or that has any landscaping around some of these apartment complexes. So I'd be hesitant to try to snatch up that extra land. I'm just not.
Might make more sense to go higher, to increase density that way, yeah. I have a question for you. We allow multifamily in the professional campus zone, right? We do.
We allow mixed use in the professional campus zone, but I don't think we allow multifamily.
Elderly housing.
Pardon me?
Elderly housing is allowed, but
Isn't the one that's going over
And
near
mixed
the
use.
hospital in the professional zone?
That's
mixed
considered mixed use.
Mixed use, but it's apartment dwellings, right?
Right.
But is that low density or high density?
Well,
Well, actually, it doesn't, it's irrelevant in a mixed-use zone, because
right, yeah, there's
we
no-
don't have any density limitation in a mixed use, because they're sharing sort of the project with the commercial use, so.
that's right. That's one of the incentives we have for mixed use, is that we don't have a density standard. It's whatever you can fit or whatever you want.
It's complicated.
But the professional campus in Lincoln City is pretty big, right? Is it
There
limited
are
area?
there are some substantial areas of professional campus around the hospital, along West Devils Lake Road there, and some up 22nd Street is principally where it is. Another means of possibly promoting affordability is to eliminate the requirement for paving of driveways. There's pros and cons, as with all of these, there's pros and cons. There's pros and cons of gravel because it washes out onto the street and can clog up storm drains and that kind of thing, and also just end up having some bad effects on pavement where you just have loose gravel on it that gets driven over. The other side is that it's a lot cheaper, so it can make a unit,
And it's pervious.
and it's pervious. Yes.
Our new assistant planner was telling me that he figures it's going to cost about $1,500 to pave his driveway, and he otherwise could get by with a couple $300 worth of gravel. So,
How does
It's
pavers,
not insignificant that it's pervious. I mean, the runoff issues are significant And if you can get infiltration back into the groundwater system, I'm all for it.
The some gravel gets so compacted, and depending on the size of the pieces of gravel, you know, it's more or less impervious.
Yeah, the typical gravel that's used in driveways is called 3/4 minus, which is you pass through a 3/4 inch sieve, and everything that goes through is, you know, including the very fine stuff. So it can get packed tightly, but it's still going to be more pervious than a paved driveway will.
How are brick pavers that are set for a driveway? Because I use brick pavers.
They're allowed.
And if you have, if you've got sand in between the pavers or something like that,
Yeah,
where
that's-
the water can.
And then it was, they were set on a level gravel,
Yeah.
I think it was 3/4 minus that we put down.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't that be more expensive than paving?
Yes, yeah, because it takes hand labor to put
Yeah.
in pavers. And also, we do
I
allow,
had a bunch of friends to lay the pavers.
Yeah.
It's less expensive than the,
Don't ask me.
yeah. We also allow pervious pavement, which is generally more expensive than impervious. But again, this is just an option to sort of nibble away at the cost of development.
So the Public Works Department has a problem with allowing gravel driveways off of paved streets because the gravel ends up in the street and chews up the street a little bit and also clogs up the storm drains and that kind of thing. So that's a consideration as well.
Now back to the trees. Right now, we require on a development of any size an arborist report on tree preservation and tree protection and tree removal. We mentioned earlier that there was a cottage cluster development that was being proposed. The cost of the arborist to do that on a site that was essentially going to be completely cleared was prohibitive enough they decided not to do cottage clusters and just do single families, standard single family homes on it. So it's something to consider as a means of reducing the cost, possibly limiting the circumstances in which an arborist is required. We also have a requirement that for a subdivision, you can only clear, initially you can only clear where the streets are going to be, and then as you get building permits, you can clear each individual lot or cut trees on each individual lot. We have that as a result of a development during the recession that failed, and they had cut all the trees and then failed, and so they had noxious vegetation coming in, erosion coming in, and that kind of thing. The other side of that is it's much more expensive to come in and clear lots on an individual basis. Even if you're just removing the house, the trees where the house itself is going to go in the driveway or whatever, rather than just clear cutting the lot, still adds substantial expense to a project, to a home.
What impact does clearing the whole area have on groundwater runoff?
It probably would be speeded up, that we would have detention requirements, erosion control requirements, which we have now.
Prior to the clearing?
Well, be a,
That would go in with the infrastructure and, well, that's a consideration, isn't it? Yes.
What,
And just maybe more loss of trees.
Yeah.
what would be, is there an expense argument against having arborists kind of go through the general, there's a lot of acreage out here, but, kind of tag some trees that really stand out as something that need to be saved, and then whether it's on a lot being planned to be developed next week or 6 years from now, just kind of fan is way out, or something of that nature, and then just put a metal plaque on it, says, this is here.
You know, I'm not sure what the cost is, but just having an arborist do anything costs money. You know, I'm not sure how substantial it is, but, you know, it's like having an engineer go out or surveyor go out or
I'm just
or
thinking,
whatever.
'cause if you got that bill for that, and then you applied that to all the, you know, broke it down and applied that to all the new fees somehow, just kind of slipped that in there.
Well, essentially, we have that for a large subdivision. We need a tree protection plan. And so that essentially is required now. And the question is whether, at least in some circumstances, whether we want to allow a little more freedom on that.
Can you go back to the example you mentioned before? I may not have heard the whole story, but somebody hired an arborist, and they had that expense, and yet they nevertheless cleared the whole lot
No,
anyway.
they did not hire the arborist. They didn't want to incur the expense of an arborist, particularly for a property that was going to be essentially completely cleared. So we get someone to go in and say, this is a good tree, this is a bad tree, whatever, when all the trees are going to go, didn't make sense, and it was a substantial enough expense that he decided not to go that route.
Maybe we need to look at that a little differently, to say this size lot is probably going to be totally cleared if it's ever developed, so they don't need an arborist, or this PUD over here that extends over several acres does need an arborist,
That's
because
what I'm
we don't
thinking.
want to have it all come down.
Right, yeah. Because I condensed this a little bit, because what it originally said was eliminate arborist requirement for small projects.
That makes more sense to me. Yeah.
You know, and another thing that I've found in reviewing projects is if somebody wants to avoid the cost of getting an arborist to save one tree, so they just cut them all down, you know, and they just say, okay, I'm clearing the whole lot.
Well, that's happened on several lots in the Rhodes End area.
On-
They've just been absolutely clear cut.
Yeah.
And it's a scar. I mean, it's an erosion issue. It's an invasive species issue. It's a loss of
Groundwater issue.
habitat issue. It's a groundwater issue. There's mud that now goes across the road regularly that didn't used to. So,
Yeah, for a single-family lot, you're allowed, when you have a building permit, you're allowed to clear it. In Rhodes End, before we put our zoning in on Rhodes End, there were some lots that were just completely blissed, including one just a couple lots away from mine, and they left almost everything there, the cut trees and.
yeah, it's a
yeah,
mess.
yeah.
Well, I want to think about this one some more.
Next.
Yeah.
Another thing is to allow duplexes on corner lots regardless of the lot size. Right now, in most single-family residential zones, we require at least 8,000 square feet for a duplex. A lot of places allow them on any corner lot.
I think 5,000 square feet or 3,500 is big enough for a duplex on a corner lot?
If it's a little duplex, that's the thing, it's, you know, people will build what they believe the market will want to make use of. And we have the lot coverage standards, and as the lot gets smaller, the amount of coverage gets gets bigger, but not where it's the whole lot.
I think there's some very small duplexes in Nelscott.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot more duplexes around than people realize. But in this particular case, this drawing, it's a duplex. There's I got a new toy here, but there's one here and another one here, and the entrances are on the different streets. That's one of the key things on a corner duplex is have the entrance on different streets. So when you look at the house, you don't see two entrances. You see just looking at it from one street, you're going to see one entrance, so it still looks like a single-family home.
Is there an issue with VRDs and duplexes? I remember something about the Rhodes End rezoning issue that came up.
Be used as a-
Can't be used as a VRD.
Not in Rhodes End,
Just in Rhodes End?
right.
Okay.
But, of course, you could only have one unit, like in the R15 zone of a duplex be,
It has to be owner occupied, essentially.
it's not owner occupied, it's, you can only have one per owner. So, yeah, so if an owner owns a duplex, one unit could be a VRD,
Half
the,
of it.
the other one could not.
Yeah.
Right?
So this allowing duplexes on corner lots would increase density.
Right.
So again, I would just say, great, except for areas that are high risk.
Right. Okay. Another possibility is to allow tiny house developments at a high density. And by a high density, I'm thinking comparable to what we allow for a high-density multifamily or for an RV park. RV park, we allow one RV space for every 1,200 square feet, which is, once you get past the 8,000 square feet for apartments, that's the same we allow at a high density for apartments.
So roughly how far away are the units from each other at that density level?
I think,
Depends on how wide they are.
I know.
I think there's like a 15-foot minimum separation. It's been a while since I've had to look at that. But we could allow a similar thing for tiny houses, or at least for tiny houses on wheels.
I think that's good, and especially if you use that concept to rehabilitate areas within the city that need rehabilitation, you know?
Well,
Turn them into
One
tiny houses.
possibility is to limit it to commercial zones at that high level of density, so it's not in the single-family zones.
yeah, when you guys went to the tiny house symposium, was there any discussion about taking existing older trailer parks, for lack of a better term, and converting them to tiny home parks, where you would take, you know, an area that some of the trailers that are sort of in need of assistance and replacing them with tiny homes?
I expect that our RV parks probably make more money than, I mean, because they're well-used and occupancy is
I'm
high.
not talking about an RV park. I'm sorry if I said that. I'm talking about a trailer park where,
Okay.
you know, a mobile home park.
It's
Maybe
full of
that's-
older single-wides is the kind of thing you're
Yeah,
talking
yeah,
Well,
about.
they could replace an existing manufactured home with another one, or with a smaller one, as long as it has, well, for a manufactured home, that could go in any zone a single-family home could go in, because we consider it to be the same. But if it's a small trailer, or a park model, then we do allow those right now in the residential recreation zone. And in our commercial zones, I suppose we
Yeah.
would, in the RV park on West Devils Lake Road, that came before you for some land use action just a couple years ago. They have some park models in there now.
Yeah,
But-
RV parks, under state law, are allowed to have park models, manufactured homes. But I think the idea of, in these existing so-called trailer parks, which are not RV parks, they're not up to our R1 standards, may not be a bad idea to think about allowing tiny homes in them.
Just eventually flip them into
Yeah.
tiny home
Yeah.
parks.
Well,
Because
there's one place in Newport that has 3 tiny homes now. It's an RV park. And he's put 3 tiny homes there to rent out to people who are going to be working in the hospital for 3 or 4 months, or, you know, professionals that are here just on a temporary basis. Yeah, yeah. I think one of the examples from the symposium on tiny homes, there was an activist from Florida who was an advocate of tiny homes, and I think her city passed a lot of ordinances to allow them, and they developed, if I remember correctly, developed a tiny home development in a part of the city that had been blighted and run down, and it was a way of improving that area of the city. Yeah.
Interesting.
There's also sort of the flip side of tiny homes is big houses, which essentially are like a fourplex. This particular example is was a single-family home in Portland that was jacked up a little bit. They put a daylight basement under it, and then the attic was converted by adding dormers so that it became a unit. So what had been a single-family home became 4 units. There are also obviously purpose-built big houses where if you look at it, it looks just like a big house, or you may see 2 doors or something, but it fits in the single-family neighborhood, and it's just something to consider whether we want to go down that route at all.
Could those be developed as co-ops, for example, and keep the costs down? Or?
Well, that's just a form of ownership. And there's a whole management structure around co-ops and voting people in and out and that kind of thing. That's could be, I guess, the developer's choice. I think co-ops tend to be oriented more towards higher income people. That's my understanding of them. But they certainly they could be condos, they could be just outright rental units.
Yeah, converting older homes into multiple unit condos is pretty common in some of the older cities in the U.S. where they did build extremely large homes that no one can maintain anymore, so they've converted them.
That could happen with some of our other buildings currently, Lincoln City is in the near future, I think, yeah.
And then there's a possibility of having some kind of provision that allows, for lack of a better term, something I'm calling innovative housing. The reason I'm putting this out there is because zoning lags the market quite a bit. It lags good ideas. And the idea to put something in place that would allow good ideas to be brought forward without defining what they are. And there would have to be some discretionary review system set up for them, possibly as a conditional use where it would come before the planning commission or something. But just to allow something that we haven't thought of yet.
I noticed that on the way in that developers who submitted proposals to develop city property are being interviewed. And I was wondering, I don't know if you're part of that interview process, but have any new innovative ideas been presented to the city as a part of that process?
I can't say much because it's all confidential, but yes.
That's good.
When will that become public? When will that become public information?
On the council meeting of the 14th, there will be, I believe, the plan is for some decision on at least some of the properties on setting up exclusive negotiating agreements. But I don't think even then the details of what's being talked about will be brought out because this is still, it's still negotiation and figuring out what it is. But once a deal is struck, then the council will have to publicly agree to it, and at that point, in each case, it would be public.
So they're meeting in private, though, to discuss it, and I don't necessarily have a problem with that, but who is negotiating it?
At this point, nobody's negotiating anything yet. It's first, there's a team of us, of staff, and a consultant that is looking at the different proposals. And some of them are extremely vague, some of them are extremely detailed. And then from those, looking at entering into negotiations with selected developers on those properties. There's 8 properties. We have 22 proposals, some of which cover more than one property. So we a lot to choose from. Because it's purchase of real property or sale of real property, it's confidential. I don't know if our city attorney wants to explain any more about that, but I understand the desire to be more informed about it, if nothing else, out of a sense of curiosity. But
Tell us
in order
everything.
to encourage free exchange of ideas and get innovative ideas from people, they want to protect their ideas. And so that some other developer can't come in and grab them. So we want to have that happen, so that we want to keep things as confidential as long as we can.
So the staff, though, of the city, Ron Chandler and delegated personnel, are doing the negotiation before it goes to the city council?
They're doing fact-finding.
We're doing reviews of the proposals. We're not negotiating at this point. So what is it's Ron Chandler and Allison Robertson and me and our real estate consultant and Ed Drystat from the VCB are interviewing all the proposers and reviewing all the proposals. From those, we're going to make a recommendation to the council in each case that to enter into negotiations with this developer about this property, or with these developers about this property, just depending on how it goes. But then the council will make a decision on whether to do that, whether to enter into negotiations. They have not made that decision yet. The idea is that, at least in some cases, that will happen on the 14th. And then at that point, I don't know who's going to do the negotiating.
What's good about this is there seem to be a lot of people who have submitted proposals, developers. That
Yeah,
submitted
and actually there's some very exciting proposals, and there's some really neat ideas, some very clever things.
I like
some things
that.
that are way out that
That makes sense, yeah.
That makes total sense. Some review afterwards, but I like that.
You want to live in the question marks or the exclamation points?
the question marks become exclamation points.
That's
That's the
right.
idea there.
Always starts with a question.
You know, I agree with you that zoning tends to lag behind where society is, if you want to go philosophical on us. But, you know, this allowing innovative, affordable housing at high density, maybe. I know, you know, we saw in the presentation, I still keep going back to the woman living in Japan in the 80 square feet apartment and think, well, you know, I can understand where there would be some demand for that in certain situations, such as the middle of Tokyo or the middle of New York City. We're not in the middle of New York or Tokyo or really any place where we have a really high demand for young urban professionals at this point, really. I think our housing demands are a little bit different than that.
Right.
And so I'm looking forward to seeing some innovative, affordable housing, high-density suggestions.
One thing that's come up is co-housing, and right now we don't have a way of addressing that. The big issue on that is system development charges, and so we need to address how we do that, how we assess them on such a housing structure, so that we don't discourage them.
What was
Think of
what was the type of housing you were saying?
Co-housing.
co-housing, where example is you have like a central kitchen,
Oh, yeah.
Number of
housing, or
families,
for-
it's a Scandinavian model.
so
Yes.
you know, the shared cooking area, that kind of thing.
Hippie housing.
Pardon me?
Hippie housing.
Hippie housing,
Or
yeah.
college student living.
It helps,
Right,
it helps
right,
if you
exactly.
really
Well,
like
I think
the
that
College-
model is,
College students,
It's a very
young
positive.
professionals, older people.
But
Have
that kind of living
intergenerational
works, even with the rotation of new roommates all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You know what you're getting into, so people live in it appropriately for the, 99% of the
Yeah,
time.
but the other example of it is the cross-generational experience. I mean, is
Yes.
the presentation that we saw, that co-op is one similar to what I'm familiar with, where people develop relationships with the folks so that they can depend on them as they get older and they need change. Plus, they are kept young by the kids that are also living in the units. So,
Yeah.
And the older people maybe
I
can.
think it was a
can
traditional type
try-
of
provide childcare.
situation years ago that our society has abandoned that, basically.
true.
any other possibilities? Or?
That, for you to address, I mean, I haven't come up with any others. There probably are, but your authority in terms of initiating things is limited to amending the zoning ordinance, Title 17.
So I was going to ask you about the next steps with the information you gave us this evening. It's not within our purview to say we recommend some of these to the city council to consider or change the
Every one of
ordinance.
these things I've said up till now, I believe is within your purview, and you can not just recommend to the council, but actually initiate legislation to do that, and then make recommendation up to the city
So
council.
if we like some of them, recommend the city staff draft an ordinance
Right.
to
Yeah.
present to the city council.
Yeah.
So I'll ask my fellow commissioners, how would you like to proceed on this? Maybe let it gel for a meeting or two, or perhaps go back to the beginning of this and we could do a quick straw poll on some
If
of
you
the
want, I can give you, we can send you copies of this so that then you can reflect on it and maybe discuss it in the next
Yeah.
future
I like
meeting.
that idea.
I like that too. I've
I
got
like-
to do some, I can do research on my own with this since am I correct? Like I can look at mobile homes.
With
what the-
legislative, yeah.
Okay. So there's some stuff that I wanted to look at that I obviously haven't had a chance to, that, styles of these manufactured homes and a couple other.
Are there any ideas from commissioners that we might want to add to this list that Richard gave us this evening?
Only well, for me, only just to stay mindful of the high-risk areas and make sure that we don't lose sight of that.
Mhm.
Now,
I would appreciate a copy of this, Richard. This was real helpful.
okay.
Yeah.
There's more.
Oh, okay.
But, I wanted to just go over some things that really aren't within your purview, but that can be done regarding affordability of housing in Lincoln City that.
I mentioned one idea now and see where, and you can tell me where it fits.
Okay, sure.
And there are a lot of homes in Lincoln City, I think, that I'd be called fixer-uppers, and I was wondering if there are incentives we can provide to a developer who purchases that home, if it's for sale, for example, to fix it up, and, say you've got to rent it to somebody who works in Lincoln City, and you get a special deal on loans or low-interest loan, or a break on the system development charges, or, just to make it more affordable, to renovate that older home for somebody to live in, yeah.
That's a possibility. I think it's more in this later
Fine, okay.
thing that I'll go through quickly. Other ideas for other people to deal with.
I like that.
Assess system development charges on a square foot basis. This has been something that we've talked about for some time. Newport has started doing that, and I think it's very successful.
But that
So it means
lowers
that
the
smaller
cost for-
homes
yeah.
pay a smaller SDC. Makes them-
SDCs on a single-family home are now about 11,000,
Somewhere around there, yeah.
regardless of the size of the home.
Right.
Is Newport considering number of bathrooms in that calculation, or is it straight square footage?
It's not based on fixtures, it's based on square
Just
footage.
straight square footage. Okay.
Abate property taxes for a homeowner of affordable house,
So define abate for me, so that,
could be reduce.
okay.
Yeah. Now, this is for someone who owns an affordable home. They're living in, is the idea there. They pay lower taxes. And there are means, legal means for making sure for X period of time, and typically it's 60 years, that the home stays affordable. So you don't just get a tax break and you get to make all the money off the house, that kind of thing. Related to that also would be to have a tax abatement for for a nonprofit owner of affordable rental homes.
Why limit it to nonprofit? I mean, if you're going to make a commitment to the city to build a, 10-unit apartment complex, and you're going to make a commitment to keep those as affordable units, what's the
It could be anyone, yeah, it could be. You see this more typically for nonprofits, although some nonprofits don't pay taxes anyway, but yeah, it could be broader.
Okay.
Abate or waive system development charges for affordable dwellings. I mean, it's either reduce them or eliminate them for ones that are going to stay affordable for a period of time.
I want to add in there that, this sounds like, why wouldn't you do that? But system development charges do pay for parks, and they pay for, what else, Richard?
Pay for the water system, sewer system, stormwater system,
Yeah,
transportation system.
Something else has to pick up.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a policy decision. That's why the council has to decide that, whether what amounts to the rest of us subsidize affordable housing.
Exactly.
The legislature authorized cities to impose a construction excise tax, so that on new development, I think it's 1 or 1.5% or something like that, that then that money would go towards an affordable housing fund. And some places are doing that. Obviously, the response to that is you're making houses cost more so you can have affordable housing. And yes, that's true, but it's a little bit more, and that becomes a subsidy that has a higher return than the cost on the for the tax itself. And that's a number of communities around the state have imposed that. Newport has done that.
And how does somebody draw on that fund? I mean, you've created another account where you're dropping tax dollars, and then how does somebody use that money?
I'd have to look at the legislation exactly to see what it says, what limitations it puts on. I know what we have done with our affordable housing fund money is buy land and then make it available for affordable development. So that could be.
Has that been, in your opinion, successful?
In a very limited way, yeah. I mean, we've had only a couple of houses built, but part of the money we used to buy the Villages of Cascade Head property was from our affordable housing fund, and we're going to make sure that we incorporate affordable housing in that development. And in particular, the Fernwood development, which is the piece we have on the market right now, we are. We're looking at several possible developers for that, and making sure that whatever we end up with incorporates at least some affordable housing in it. And that likely, and again, that depends on negotiation, but that can be accommodated perhaps through allowing a lower purchase price for the land than the market would normally.
Is
normally
that
require.
something the city is considering doing now with the existing properties that
Yes.
are under consideration for developers?
Yeah. Another possibility is to issue affordable housing bonds. That would obviously requires a vote of the people, but it would have funds that could be used for affordable housing any number of ways, subsidizing particular developments or purchasing land, what have you, paying down SDCs. Any number of things can be done. It's just how that gets defined, and then see what if the people want it. You know, we did an open space bond a number of years ago to buy land for open space. It could be to buy land for affordable housing. Bond issues happen for all kinds of different things. It's just a possibility, a place to get some money. Basically, it's the community agreeing to tax itself to provide affordable housing. Provide housing rehabilitation loans or grants. We have had a revolving fund for housing rehabilitation loans, and it's pretty much exhausted, I think, at this point. Is what we recapture when the houses are sold. We get the money back, but I don't think that any of them have been sold, or I don't believe there's much money left in that account. So I know when I first was working for the city, every month we were reviewing applications, and we haven't done it for years. So, but again, this could be an area where if the Affordable Housing Fund or bond money could go into rehabilitation. Certainly one of the cheapest ways to have a house is to take an existing house and fix it up.
I was thinking in the Nelscott area, as well as other areas of the city where we have older homes that were built in the 1920s. It'd be great to refurbish some of those and keep the original style and the original architecture.
Yeah.
Maintains the character of the community very well.
Right, yeah. And we're not talking about, someone come in, buy a house cheap, fix it up and flip it for a big profit. This would be basically for someone to stay in, to make it habitable, fix the roof, put in insulation. We've done things like put in new windows so that they're more energy efficient and those kinds of things.
And then is there, in the experience the city's had with this, then is there a requirement for the people to stay there a particular amount of time to guard against the flipping, so that they put a amount of sweat equity into it and then they're expected to stay?
I believe there is. I'm not sure. It's been so long since I've done it. I'm not really sure. Don't remember. But we certainly want to avoid the flippers. Yeah. And then there's what's called a vertical housing zone, which it sounds like high rises, but that's not what it is. It's basically mixed use, having housing above commercial space. But with a vertical housing zone, there's a tax abatement authorized by state law for, I think, up to 10 years. Would be a tax abatement on the property. So it's just another way of encouraging mixed-use affordable housing.
Another thing that we might consider for that, Richard, is we found that a couple of people who wanted to do housing above commercial were going to have to put in sprinkler systems that were very expensive, and that might be another way to subsidize that development.
Don't we permit this now in Lincoln
We
City?
permit mixed use. This would encourage it by having a tax abatement.
Got it.
So
Just restrict the sprinklers to the commercial zone. Maybe that would be instead of the whole building.
Well, it's a building code issue. It's not something we can choose to do. Yeah. And it's a safety issue.
Yeah.
So it's whatever the code requires, and it requires a certain amount of fire-resistant construction and sprinklers on top of that in some circumstances. So that's what I've got on this.
Well, thank you very much. Very informative.
Yes,
and
thank you.
I look forward, you'll get hard copies of that?
Sure.
To all of us, as well as the commissioners who weren't here this evening, yeah. And then maybe in a month or so, come back and let's revisit this, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
First
Thank you,
meeting in
Richard.
June?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, good ideas, yeah,
Okay.
thank you.
Any questions of Richard, further questions? Okay. Any new business? None this evening. We have no training this evening, I believe, correct?
That's right.
Reports and comments. Staff, city staff. Richard? Richard? No?
A couple announcements. One is that tomorrow evening at the community center is the open house to discuss park development just north of the police station. That starts at 5:30, and that should be very interesting. And let's see, on May 14th, we have Meg Reed coming to finally give her presentation on tsunami resilience and how we can, and the project that we're going to be doing along those lines.
This will be in the city council meeting on the 14th.
Right. And then, do we have anything coming up for our agenda for the meeting scheduled for May 15th? Or do we need to cancel that?
I think we should cancel it. We have nothing.
Kate won't be here. I don't know if we could
And
do
I
it
know
without
Gary
her.
won't be here, and you won't be here, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we should cancel. You agree? Cancel.
Okay.
May I ask one question? Tomorrow night at the community center, is the landscape architect going to be at the presentation for ideas?
I don't believe so, but they have provided Jeannie Sprague, our new Parks and Rec director, with boards that show pictures of various activities, and I mean, I haven't seen them, but I understand that they've provided her with some material for the meeting.
Thank you.
Right. And then we mentioned at some point in our last meeting, perhaps doing a tour in June, but maybe after, maybe closer to the second meeting.
Okay.
We could do a tour of the Wacoma Woods area and maybe some of the city properties that at that point in time may be closer to being developed or
Sure.
decisions being made. Good. Okay. I think that's it. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.